I'm Ann Simmons in the newsroom of the Los Angeles Times. New reports issued by the advocacy groups Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch contend that far more civilians have been killed by US airstrikes in Pakistan and Yemen than American officials acknowledge. Amnesty examined 9 strikes in Pakistan, and Human Rights Watch investigated 6 attacks in Yemen. The Los Angeles Times reports that the White House has declined to respond in detail to the allegations, but in May, Obama announced tighter standards for targeted strikes. Joining me to shed more light on the issue are Letta Taylor, a senior researcher on terrorism and counterterrorism for Human Rights Watch, and Andrea Praso, a senior counterterrorism attorney and advocate for the group. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
So first of all, Letta, let me start with you. Just give us a few details about the alleged attacks that the report says has taken place. How many civilians have allegedly been targeted and killed?
Well, we just looked at 6 of the 80 strikes by the United States with drones and other weapons on Yemen since it began its targeted killing program in 2009 there. And in the 6 strikes we examined, of the 82 people killed, 2/3 were civilians. It may be, however, we cannot say that this number is indicative of the overall number of civilians killed. We simply don't know, and that's why we're calling on the Obama administration to provide information immediately on exactly who it is killing and why in these attacks.
But Letta, where does this information come from? Tell us a bit about how you actually researched the report. Was it strictly from eyewitnesses, the Yemeni authorities?
It's very difficult to investigate these strikes because many of the areas are inaccessible, not only to foreigners, but to Yemenis themselves, depending on what tribe they're from or what political affiliation they have. So in 2 of the strikes, we were able to send researchers to the scene, but in the other cases, and even to supplement the work on those 2 strikes, we had to work through multiple contacts to bring witnesses and relatives of family members, security officials and others who are willing to come forward to us in Sana'a, the capital, as well as Aden, a port city to the south. Many were terrified of coming to talk to us. Many canceled at the last minute and only came after further contacts with intermediaries to reassure them that we were not going to harm them in our conversations. There's a lot of political pressure in Yemen on victims of these strikes and relatives of those killed to not speak to international groups.
Right. Well, Andrew, if we look at the US's role, how supposedly is the US violating international human rights law?
Well, 2 of the strikes that we've documented indicate that there have been unlawful killings of civilians. Civilians were indiscriminately killed. And a fundamental principle of the laws of war is that a party must distinguish between lawful targets, between combatants, and between civilians. And we've documented cases where civilians were the only victims of a particular strike, or where the type of weapon that was used, in this case cluster munitions, is the type of weapon that is actually incapable of distinguishing properly between combatants and civilians. And then in the other strikes that we've examined, we have serious questions about whether there have been violations, either of the laws of war or of international human rights law.
What kind of reaction or response have you gotten from US officials and from Yemeni authorities?
Well, we asked, sorry.
Please.
Go ahead, Andrea.
We haven't heard much from the U.S. government, and it's not surprising because one of the biggest recommendations we have based on our findings is that there needs to be more transparency. The Obama administration has not been forthcoming about its targeted killing policies. Now, I think the administration would disagree and say that, in fact, they've been very forthcoming and point us to a series of speeches given by senior administration officials over the years. But even if you take the time to piece together all of those speeches, it's just not enough. It's not clear what legal framework applies. It's not clear what policy applies. It's not clear if the administration is actually complying with its own policy. And then our report also calls into question whether the war model is even applicable to the conflict with al-Qaeda anymore.
Well, Letta, how do you actually go about vetting these allegations? Obviously, relatives of victims are going to say, well, my relative isn't a member of Al Qaeda or any terrorist group?
Well, we checked the information on these attacks with multiple sources, including some government sources speaking off the record. So we tried to we made sure that we cross-checked all the information in all of these cases to ensure that we simply were not being manipulated by Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. There were some attacks that I started researching that I put aside for now, at least, because it was not clear that I was really getting accurate information.
And just to wrap up, Andrea, what kind of action do you want the US government to take in the wake of these reports?
Well, we believe we've documented at least 2 instances of unlawful killings, possibly others. The Amnesty report that's also being released today has also documented potentially unlawful killings. And we think the case is very clear that there needs to be a detailed and public investigation into each of these potentially unlawful killings, as well as any other potentially unlawful killings. And we're calling on Congress to open up an inquiry and to do a really thorough searching examination of these strikes.
Well, thank you so much, ladies, today for your time and for your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our pleasure.
Thank you. For more coverage on this story, please read Ken Delanian's story at latimes.com.